The grand ballroom of Westminster Palace gleamed under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with anticipation as nobles, diplomats, and distinguished guests filled the ornate hall. Every eye was fixed on the raised platform where King Alexander stood, his silver crown catching the light as he surveyed the assembled crowd. Lady Camilla Harrington stood near the front, her emerald gown sweeping the polished marble floor. For 3 years, she had been the king's closest companion, attending state dinners, charity galas, and private gatherings at his side. Everyone in the kingdom assumed their relationship would lead to marriage. The newspapers had already begun calling her the future queen. But tonight was different. There was a tension in the air that even the most oblivious courtier could feel. The king's advisers whispered among themselves, and the queen mother sat with an unusually rigid posture in her gilded chair. Catherine Bennet stood quietly near the back of the room, trying to make herself invisible. She had only been invited because of her work with the Royal Foundation's children's charity. As a commoner who had risen through dedication and intelligence to become the Foundation's youngest director, she felt out of place among the nobility. Her simple navy dress, though elegant, seemed plain compared to the jewels and silk surrounding her. The king raised his hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. His voice rang clear across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have asked you here tonight to share news that will shape the future of our kingdom." Camilla straightened her shoulders, a confident smile playing at her lips. She had been preparing for this moment, already planning the charitable causes she would champion as queen. "For too long," the king continued, "I have allowed others to dictate the path of my heart. I have followed protocol and tradition, even when it meant denying my true feelings." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. This was not how royal announcements typically began. The king's eyes scanned the room until they found what they were looking for. "Lady Catherine Bennet, would you please come forward?" The blood drained from Kate's face. Every head in the room turned to stare at her. She stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Camilla's smile faltered, her perfectly manicured hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Please!" "Catherine," the king said again, his voice gentler this time. On trembling legs, Kate made her way through the crowd. The sea of people parted before her, their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and, in some cases, barely concealed outrage. She could hear the whispers starting already. Who was she? Why was the king calling her forward? When she reached the platform, the king extended his hand to help her up the steps. The touch of his fingers sent electricity through her entire body. She had tried so hard to ignore the connection between them during their meetings about the charity work. Every time their eyes met across a conference table, every accidental brush of hands when passing documents, she had told herself it meant nothing. He was the king. She was nobody. Now, standing beside him in front of the entire court, she could barely breathe. "Many of you know Lady Catherine through her exceptional work with our children's hospitals and schools," the king began. "What you don't know is that over the past 18 months, she has also captured something I thought I had lost forever: my ability to hope for true happiness." Camilla's face had turned pale. Her mother, the Duchess of Harrington, half rose from her seat before being pulled back down by her husband. "I know this breaks with tradition," the king continued. "I know many of you expected a different announcement tonight. But I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. Tonight, I choose to follow my heart." He turned to Kate, taking both of her hands in his. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. This couldn't be happening. It was like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. "Catherine Bennet," the king said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom. You have shown me that true nobility comes not from birthright but from character. Your compassion, intelligence, and dedication to others have inspired me to be a better man and a better king. I can no longer imagine a future without you by my side." Then, in full view of the stunned assembly, King Alexander did something no one had ever seen before. He dropped to one knee. The collective gasp that went through the room was so loud it seemed to shake the chandeliers. Camilla's carefully composed mask finally shattered. Her eyes filled with tears of rage and humiliation as she watched the man she had assumed would marry her kneel before a commoner. From his pocket, the king produced a ring, not just any ring, but the celestial star, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother. It was the ring everyone had assumed would one day grace Camilla's finger. "Catherine Bennet," the king said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife and queen?" Kate couldn't speak. The room spun around her as 500 pairs of eyes bore into her back. She could feel Camilla's furious gaze burning into her, could sense the shock radiating from every corner of the ballroom. The Queen Mother had gone completely rigid, her face an unreadable mask. "Your Majesty," Kate finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied simply, still on one knee. "Say yes. And let me spend the rest of my life proving that love is more powerful than tradition." The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had stopped, waiting for her answer. Kate looked down at the king, this powerful man who commanded nations but was kneeling before her, vulnerable and hopeful. Then she looked out at the crowd, at the mixture of faces, some supportive, many scandalized, and one, Camilla's, twisted with betrayal and fury. What happened next would change the kingdom forever. But in that moment, suspended between her old life and an unimaginable future, Catherine Bennet had to make the most important decision of her life. The seconds stretched like hours as Kate stood frozen on the platform. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once. She remembered the first time she had met the king when he had visited the children's ward she managed. He had spent hours talking to the sick children, not as a king, but as a friend. She had been struck by his genuine kindness, so different from the stiff, formal monarch the public usually saw. "How dare you?" The sharp voice cut through the silence like a blade. Camilla had stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "This is a farce, a complete betrayal of everything the monarchy stands for." The king rose to his feet, still holding Kate's hand. His expression hardened as he faced Camilla. "Lady Harrington, you will show respect in this hall." "Respect?" Camilla laughed bitterly. "Like the respect you've shown me? 3 years, Alexander. 3 years I've stood by your side, supported you, been the perfect companion. And you throw it all away for her?" She gestured dismissively at Kate. The crowd began to murmur, the spell of silence finally broken. Kate could hear fragments of conversation, some defending tradition, others whispering about true love, many simply shocked at the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. The Queen Mother stood slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her 70 years. The room fell quiet again, waiting for her pronouncement. Everyone knew that while Alexander was king, his mother's opinion carried enormous weight. "My son," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of royal duty. "You have always been headstrong, but this goes beyond anything I could have imagined." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Mother, She raised a hand, silencing him. Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned to Kate. "Miss Bennet, is it? Tell me, what do you know of being queen, of the sacrifices required, the constant scrutiny, the loss of privacy, of freedom, of any life you might call your own?" Kate found her voice at last. She lifted her chin, meeting the Queen Mother's penetrating gaze. "Your Majesty, I know very little of such things, but I do know about service. I know about putting others before yourself. I've spent my life caring for children who have nothing, trying to give them hope and dignity. Perhaps the scale is different, but the heart of it, the dedication to something greater than yourself, I understand that." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed the Queen Mother's face. Lord Pemberton, the King's chief advisor, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss this matter in private. The constitutional implications alone—" "The Constitution says nothing about whom the king may marry," Alexander interrupted. "I have studied it thoroughly, believe me." "But tradition," Pemberton began. "Tradition once said kings could not marry divorced women. Tradition once said royalty could not marry outside their faith. Traditions change, Lord Pemberton, when they no longer serve their purpose." Camilla's mother, the Duchess of Harrington, could no longer contain herself. "This is absurd. My daughter has been groomed for this position since childhood. She knows 7 languages, has been trained in diplomacy, understands the intricate protocols of royal life. What does this nobody bring to the crown?" Before Kate could respond, a young voice piped up from the crowd. "She saved my brother's life!" Everyone turned to see a teenage girl in a wheelchair being pushed forward by her parents. Kate gasped, recognizing her immediately. "Sophie?" Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "When my brother was dying and the doctors had given up, Miss Kate stayed with us every night for 2 weeks. She fought for him, got specialists from around the world, never gave up. She didn't know we were watching tonight, but when I saw her up there, I had to speak. She did the same for my daughter," another voice called out. More people began stepping forward. Parents, children, volunteers from the foundation. Each had a story about Kate's compassion, her tireless work, her refusal to give up on any child, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. Alexander squeezed Kate's hand, his eyes shining with pride. But Camilla wasn't finished. "How touching," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But running a charity is not running a kingdom. She'll be eaten alive by the press, by foreign dignitaries, by the very people she thinks she's serving. She doesn't belong in our world." "Our world?" Kate finally spoke up, her voice stronger now. "Lady Harrington, with all due respect, I've seen your world. I've seen it in the faces of mothers who can't afford medicine for their children while they watch royalty parade in jewels worth millions. I've seen it in the empty promises made at charity galas, where the wealthy congratulate themselves for donating what amounts to pocket change. If that's the world you're protecting, then maybe it needs to change." The room erupted. Some applauded, others shouted in outrage. The carefully controlled royal announcement had turned into something unprecedented, a public debate about the very nature of the monarchy itself. Through it all, Alexander never let go of Kate's hand. When the noise finally died down, he spoke again. "I am not asking for your approval, though I hope to earn it in time. I am simply informing you of my decision. Catherine Bennet has not only captured my heart, but has shown me what kind of king I want to be, one who serves not tradition but truth, not protocol but people." He turned back to Kate, still holding the ring. "You haven't answered my question." Kate looked at him, then at the crowd, the supporters and detractors, the shocked and the hopeful. She thought of her simple life, her small apartment, her freedom to walk down the street unnoticed. All of that would disappear if she said yes. But then she thought of the children in the hospitals, the families she could help with the resources of the crown behind her. She thought of the man before her who had just risked everything to declare his love in front of the world. She thought of Camilla's sneer and the Duchess's dismissal, and something fierce rose up in her. Not anger, but determination. "Your Majesty," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I cannot promise to be the queen that tradition expects, I can only promise to be the queen that our people deserve. One who knows their struggles, who fights for their children, who never forgets that the crown is not a privilege but a responsibility." She took a deep breath. "So yes, Alexander. Yes. I will marry you." The king slipped the ring onto her finger as half the room erupted in applause, and the other half stood in stunned silence. Camilla turned on her heel and stormed out, her parents and supporters following. The Queen Mother remained still, her expression unreadable. But Alexander only had eyes for Kate. He pulled her close, and for a moment, they were just two people in love, oblivious to the chaos around them. "You realize what you've just agreed to?" he whispered. "The press will be ruthless. Every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made, question every decision." Kate looked up at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Then I guess we'll face it together." He kissed her then in front of everyone. Another break with protocol, another tradition shattered. Some in the crowd cheered, others muttered disapproval, but Kate found she didn't care. She had made her choice, and whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage she had brought to everything else in her life. As they finally pulled apart, the Queen Mother approached. The room held its breath, waiting for her verdict. She studied Kate for a long moment, then did something no one expected. She smiled. "It seems, Miss Bennet, that you have more steel in you than I first thought. You will need it." She turned to her son. "I do not approve of your methods, Alexander, but perhaps it is time for something new." She looked back at Kate. "You have 3 months to prepare. I suggest you use them wisely. Being queen is not about grand gestures. It's about 1,000 small sacrifices made every day for the rest of your life. If you're prepared for that, then you have my blessing." With that, she swept from the room, leaving behind a crowd buzzing with excitement, scandal, and speculation. The news would be around the world within hours. Every newspaper, every blog, every social media platform would be dissecting this moment. But for now, Kate stood with Alexander on the platform, wearing the Ring of Queens, knowing that her life had just changed forever. The hardest part wasn't saying yes. It would be living up to the promise she had just made. The next morning, Kate woke up in her small apartment to find a crowd of photographers pressed against her windows. The simple life she had known was already gone. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since dawn. Reporters, distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, and even ex-boyfriends trying to sell their stories to the tabloids. Sarah, her best friend and roommate, handed her a cup of tea with shaking hands. "Kate, have you seen the newspapers? You're on every front page in the world." Kate took the stack of papers, her stomach churning. "The commoner who stole the crown," read one headline. "Palace scandal? King chooses nobody over noble," screamed another. But there were positive ones, too. "A modern fairy tale" and "The People's Queen." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah peeked through the peephole and gasped. "It's the Royal Guard!" Kate opened the door to find Margaret Whitfield, the Queen Mother's private secretary, standing in the hallway with 2 guards. The older woman's expression was stern, but not unkind. "Miss Bennet, the Queen Mother requests your immediate presence at the palace. We have much work to do." The next 3 months were the hardest of Kate's life. She was moved into a secure wing of the palace, away from the prying eyes of the media. Every day was a grueling schedule of lessons: protocol, languages, diplomatic history, constitutional law, and even how to walk, sit, and hold a teacup properly. Camilla, meanwhile, had not gone quietly. She gave a series of exclusive interviews, painting herself as the victim of a cruel betrayal. She spoke of the years she had wasted waiting for Alexander, the promises he had allegedly made, the the future that had been stolen from her. Public opinion was divided. Some saw her as a woman wronged, others as an entitled aristocrat who had assumed too much. The stress began to show on Kate. She lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and more than once, Margaret found her crying in the library, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had taken on. "I'm going to fail," Kate said one particularly difficult evening after a disastrous practice dinner where she had used the wrong fork and accidentally insulted the French ambassador. "They're right. I don't belong here." Margaret sat beside her, something she had never done before. "Do you know why the Queen Mother asked me to train you personally?" she asked. "It's because 50 years ago I was you, a commoner who fell in love with a prince. Only I didn't have the courage to say yes when he asked." Kate looked up, surprised. Margaret never spoke of her personal life. "He married a duchess instead. She was perfect, knew all the rules, never made a mistake. She was also cold, calculating, and made his life miserable for 30 years until he died." Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes were distant. "Perfect protocol does not make a perfect queen, Catherine. Heart does. And you have more heart than anyone I've ever trained." That conversation changed everything. Kate stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be herself. When she visited hospitals now as the future queen, she sat on the floor with the children, just as she always had. When she attended state dinners, she talked to the servers as well as the dignitaries. She made mistakes, yes, but she owned them with grace and humor that gradually won over even her harshest critics. The wedding day arrived with all the pomp the kingdom could muster. The streets were lined with thousands of well-wishers, many holding signs that read "The People's Queen" and "Love Wins." But there were protesters, too, traditionalists who saw the marriage as the end of everything the monarchy represented. Kate's dress was simple by royal standards. She had insisted that its cost be matched by a donation to children's charities. Instead of a diamond tiara, she wore a delicate crown of silver and sapphires that had belonged to a queen known for her compassion 300 years ago. As she walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, she saw familiar faces among the dignitaries: Sophie in her wheelchair, beaming, the families from the hospital, even some of the palace staff who had become her allies. The Queen Mother sat in the front row, her expression softer than Kate had ever seen it. But it was Alexander's face that held her attention. He looked at her like she was the only person in the vast cathedral, his love and pride evident for all to see. The Archbishop began the ceremony with words that had been spoken at royal weddings for centuries. But when it came time for the vows, Alexander had requested one addition. "Catherine," he said, his voice strong and clear, "I promise not only to love and cherish you, but to support your work, to champion your causes, and to help you become not just my queen, but the queen our people need. Together, we will build a monarchy that serves not tradition, but truth, not the few, but the many." Kate's own vows were equally unconventional. "Alexander, I promise to love you not despite your crown, but including it, to help you carry its weight, and to never let either of us forget that our privilege is only justified by our service. I may not have been born to be queen, but I choose to earn it every day for the rest of my life." When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from outside the abbey could be heard even through the ancient stone walls. As they walked back down the aisle as king and queen, Kate saw Camilla in the back row. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Camilla's expression was no longer angry, just sad and, perhaps finally, accepting. The reception was a blend of high tradition and Kate's influence. Yes, there were 7 courses and priceless china, but there were also children from the hospital performing a song they had written, and the wedding cake was decorated not with gold leaf, but with sugar flowers made by patients in the Children's Ward Art Therapy program. During the speeches, the Queen Mother stood, commanding instant silence. "I have lived through many changes in this monarchy," she said. "I have seen tradition upheld and tradition transformed. Today, I see something I had not dared hope for, a future where the crown is not a burden passed down by blood, but a responsibility taken up by choice. Catherine, you have chosen a difficult path. But watching you these past months, seeing your dedication and your refusal to let protocol override compassion, I believe you may be exactly what this old institution needs." She raised her glass. "To the King and Queen, may they reign with wisdom, serve with humility, and never forget that love brought them together when tradition would have kept them apart." The toast was echoed throughout the hall, even by some who had initially opposed the match. Change, it seemed, was possible after all. Late that night, after the guests had gone and the palace was quiet, Kate stood on the balcony of their private apartments, looking out over the city. Alexander joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Kate leaned back against him, thinking of the journey from that shocking night in the ballroom to this moment. "No," she said firmly. "No regrets. But I meant what I said in my vows. I'm going to earn this every day." "We both will," he promised. A year later, when Kate established the Crown Foundation for Children, using royal resources to expand the work she had started as a commoner, even her harshest critics had to admit she was making good on her promise. When she held town halls in forgotten communities, listening to people's concerns without a script or protocol, they called her radical. When she convinced Alexander to open parts of the palace as shelters during a harsh winter, they called her unconventional. But the children in the hospitals, the families she helped, the communities she championed, they called her their queen. And that, Kate decided, was the only title that truly mattered. Camilla eventually married a duke and moved to Switzerland, finding her own happiness away from the spotlight. The Queen Mother became Kate's strongest ally, often saying that choosing love over tradition had given the monarchy its greatest gift, a queen who served not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And so the girl who had stood at the back of the ballroom, trying to be invisible, became one of the most visible and beloved queens in the nation's history. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Not because she followed every tradition, but because she created new ones based on compassion, service, and the radical idea that love could indeed conquer all. The kingdom had worried that choosing heart over heritage would weaken the crown. Instead, it made it stronger than ever. For in choosing Kate, Alexander hadn't just chosen a wife, he had chosen a partner who would help him transform an ancient institution into something that could thrive in a modern world. And they lived, if not exactly happily ever after, then purposefully, meaningfully, and always together, facing whatever challenges came their way with the same courage that had brought them together on that unforgettable night when love triumphed over tradition.